In this HPE ALM Octane video, we'll talk about a few of the administrative capabilities within the environment. I'll start by moving over to Settings, and you'll see when Settings comes up here that we're going to talk about specific entities available within the environment. Entities are things that we would call like a defect, a theme, a feature, user story, and so forth. Each entity allows us to have specific rules, user-defined fields, a workflow, and customizable forms. I have a couple of rules here already created, and this is very different than what we would have done in the past. We're not requiring scripting, we're not requiring any programming, yet if I look at the specific rule here, I'm asking for the description field to be required when there's a condition of the field's severity equaling urgent or very high. In addition to the rules, we can have additional user-defined fields that become visible within our forms, and we have a visual workflow. This is the most visible change from HPE ALM in the Octane platform. No longer do we require scripting to facilitate changes in states or phases. We can do this visually. You can see I have a meta phase, new, in progress, in testing, and done, with individual phases contained within it, like new or deferred or opened. I can customize the transition between these based on either user permissions or based on a rule that we would have defined visually a little bit earlier on. So I can choose to add a new phase between, for example, opened and duplicate. I choose to add a phase. I'll rename the phase something a little bit differently over here. Instead of phase 8, we'll call it opened further or something simple like this. I have the meta phase that it's contained in this case, in progress, and I can begin to find the rules that may determine why one could go from opened to open further and how open further may potentially go to, if I add a transition here, to a phase closed. It's a much easier process to be able to facilitate workflow and the transition of elements throughout your lifecycle and your release flows. The last piece we'll talk about here are customizable forms. You can see that if I'm looking at the defect record, this form is specific to defect as it's been entered into the system. That's different from the form that we might use when we create a new defect. So we can pare down the information to only grab what's critical when something is being entered for new versus what people may need to add additional later as we move the defect through the actual release lifecycle. Themes, features, and so forth may have very different both workflows and may have very different forms. In addition to entities, we also have the ability to manage releases within this environment. A release is a great way for us to manage a specific set of deliverables over a period of time. For example, in this case here, a release would actually be based around specific quantity of sprints and specific team members that may be attached to work within that release itself. So I have a number of different teams that I've established. We'll cover that in just a moment. The blue team, for example, has a certain number of team members, and this release itself has additional details such as its duration, contained sprints, start and end date, and so forth. Now, if we move over to the teams, we can manage our users in the environment within the context of a specific team. Team members can be shared amongst different teams. So for example, if I look at the blue team, we're able to manage an estimated velocity, a capacity, and ultimately which team members are assigned to work within this environment. This helps when we set up to-do lists and are able to understand what work is accomplished and then later to assess the velocity. So for example, as I'm adding a couple of different people here to the team, I can adjust the expected capacity and the velocity accordingly. So in this very short module, we've gone through a brief overview of entities, available releases, how we manage teams. In other videos, we'll talk about setting up CI servers, test assignment rules, provisioning your demo data, and the tech preview for production coverage, which is a predictive piece of capability. Of course, you can also get more information from the Help Center at any time within the HPE ALM Octane environment.